Okay, good morning. We're in the second half of the poem, and I just want to remind you that the two halves of the poem are perfectly equal. Not only 8 verses each, but each one is 56 words each. And there are people that try to make an issue of the number 56. It's 7 times 8. So 7, of course, is the number that represents natural cycles. Most cycles that we look at in Judaism are 7s, whether it's about the week or Shemitah, or the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot. That 7 represents cycles and repetition, while 8 represents lemala min hateva, represents supernatural phenomena, that when you go beyond the natural, you get to number 8. And that, of course, is why there are 8 days to Chanukah, because Chanukah is about being supernatural, being lema'ala min hateva, being above the natural phenomena. So bearing that in mind, we're continuing to assume that our poem is a conversation between a master and a student. Just reminding you that the most common opinion about our poem is it was written by Moshe Rabbeinu. According to the Gemara, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Psalms 90 through 100. Those 11 Psalms were written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Bearing that in mind, we're going to accept the midrashic opinion that this psalm is that this psalm is a conversation. It's clearly a conversation when you look at the syntax. But we're going to follow the position of the midrash. It's a conversation between King David HaMelech, advising his son Shlomo HaMelech, and that explains the first half of the poem beautifully, because the first half of the poem talks about surviving in battle situations. So the first half of the poem is talking about you survive when you believe in God, when you're connected to the Rabbanu Shalom. When a Kadosh Baruch Hu is watching you, you survive even though the people around you might be dying or being hurt, either by, the two famous examples are by disease or by warfare arrows. But it doesn't make any difference what the context is. You can put in anything you want. This was in the context of the 10th century BCE. So you can put in anything. There's a traffic accident, and shards are falling, and how come you're saved and someone else isn't? So the first part of the poem is saying that's because you had this special relationship with Hashem, and Hashem saved you, even though others may have perished. Then we get to verse 9, and verse 9, the first 4 words are sort of connected a little bit to the first part of the poem. The first line of the poem is a prayer or a shevach, a praise for the one who sits. That's like the son, the student, praising the Rabbi who's protected by God. Okay? And then verse 9 has the same thing. Ki atah Hashem machsi. Because for you, God is protecting you, who is also my machsi. We've had that term before. Machsi, my cover, my shelter, my refuge, my bomb shelter, if you will. Machsi. So we see there's a praise for the person giving to the master. Then the master speaks. Now the second half begins the same way. But people look at these 4 words as sort of ending praise, master's advice, praise. And so when you put that together, and I mentioned before, till the middle of line 9 is 60 words. And 60 words also represents protection, whether it represents the 60 letters in Birchat Kohanim, which is about being protected. Yivrecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. Do you need a sheet? Okay. So we're in line 9. in the middle of line 9. Or 60 represents, again, if we're talking about King Solomon, in the 3rd chapter of Shir Shirim, King Solomon talked about his bed or his litter or his carriage was protected and surrounded by 60 Giborim, warriors, 60, Shomrei Rosh. What do we call that in English? Bodyguards. Okay, he's got 60 bodyguards, right? So that's the first. That's the ending of that 60-word part. And now we have the speaker who is, we believe, the Rabbi or the father, King David, speaking to the son again. Here is the advice, and this is now new. Elion samta me'onecha. That when you get into this positive, uplifting position, okay, that what happens is that that on high you are placed in your ma'on. Now, what's a ma'on? I was trying to see the translation he has for ma'on. Here he translates haven, dwelling, okay? Ma'on. I like haven, actually, which is the JPS. I forgot to bring the altar just to check other translations. So in other words, when you're in this situation, you're in a lofty status, Elion, and you are placed in a secure place. I like the word haven. Haven, like fits nicely. It's both a dwelling and a safe, you're in a safe place. Lo ta'una elecha ra'ah. No bad stuff befalls you. Ta'una, modern Hebrew, accident. Okay? Ta'una drachim, right, is a traffic accident. Okay? So nothing bad befalls you. V'nega lo yikrav ba'ohalecha. And no nega, again, we're going to say disease, pestilence, plague, okay, is going to reach your tent. Do you notice I italicized the last words in 9 and 10? In the first part of the poem, the place where the student is described as a mitzudah or a machsi. The places that the person is dwelling is fortified, is like a military term. In the second half of the poem, it's a haven or a tent. There's softer terms in the second half. The second half is when the student has reached a higher level and feels even further away from harm. I don't know how many of you were here in Israel in 1991 when the Scuds were falling, right? It was scary, okay? But there was a difference between people living in the northern, from Jerusalem and north, where the Scuds were falling. You were in your shelter, and that you felt safe, but you knew that the possibility of danger was out there, as opposed to being in your shelter in Beersheba, where you didn't have to go into the shelter because everybody assumed the Scuds couldn't get that far. And the same thing is quite often true when rockets are coming from Gaza. Some places feel safe because they're in a shelter, but if you're further away, you feel safe and you're sitting in your living room. So that's the second half of the poem. You're sitting in your living room because you're that far away from the bad stuff. And now we come to verse 11, which I put in brackets on purpose. This is a very, very famous verse. And there are many people many customs in many communities that when they use this poem for Tfilat HaDerech, after you've said the blessing, there are people that read this, they stop after verse 11. And there are some people that as a poem for reading as part of Kriya Shema Alamito, before you go to sleep, there are some people, again, that end here. Some people say the whole thing. Some people say the whole thing. But some people stop here. And the Gemara in Shvuot, Daf Tet Vav. Do you have a copy? Do you need a copy? I think we
From last week, no?
It's the same one. Yeah, we're still in the second. Oh, then you have. We're in line 11. According to the Gemara in Shvuot, Daf Tet Vav Amud Bet, if anyone wants to check, there's a Braita about a poem. And in that Braita it says that the Sanhedrin used to recite this poem. Well, it wasn't clear it was the Sanhedrin. The poem got recited. It was probably the Levium singing it. In the good old days of Jerusalem, we had walls around the old city. I mean, I know we have present walls, but those present walls were built by Suleiman the Magnificent in the 16th century. But in the old days, they had walls built by us. And sometimes the population would grow, like in the time of Chizkiyahu or in the time of Herod, and you had to expand the city. Well, you can't just build a new wall, because the area of Yerushalayim has halachic ramifications. For example, you have to bring Meiser Sheni, your second tithe. If you're a farmer, the second tithing, about 8% of your produce, has to be brought to Yerushalayim and consumed in Jerusalem. What defines Jerusalem? The walls. So, if I can use a word the Rav used to use all the time. So you can't willy-nilly. You can't, you say willy-nilly. You can't just, on your own, just say, oh, let's go to here. It doesn't work that way. The Sanhedrin used to vote on it. And they would vote on expanding the boundaries. And in the first temple, we believe that the Urim and Tumim, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, would prophetically tell them where they could put the new walls. It wasn't just, a municipal decision. It was a very spiritual decision. And when they actually went out to begin the process of building the walls, they said this poem. They said this poem until line 11. Because it's talking about being protected. And therefore, according to that interpretation, all of the protection in the poem is a discussion of Yerushalayim. In the first half of the poem, Yerushalayim protects us even though it's being attacked. In the second part of the poem, Yerushalayim isn't even being attacked. Jerusalem is just living in peace and tranquility. Wouldn't that be nice? It's something we dream of, but none of us have experienced in our own lifetimes, right? You have to go back a long time till Jerusalem wasn't under attack. And this is the line that they recite. However, the most famous use of this pasuk is at funerals. At funerals, there's a minhag to stop 7 times between the hearse and the graveside. And the 7 times are the 7 words in this pasuk. So notice the rabbi who's performing it, reads the poem until verse 11, and then he goes, ki, and they stop the first time. Then they stop the second time, ki malachav. Then the third time, ki malachav yitzaver. Fourth time, ki malachav yitzaver lach. That's the process for counting the 7 stops. What, therefore, do the 7 stops represent? Look at our line. Ki malachav, because God's angels, messengers, yitzavelach, are ordered, are commanded concerning you, lishmorcha, to guard you on all of your paths. What is the pshat in this line according to the minhag at the funeral? Your final derech. God should guard you on this, your final path in your physical existence. So why 7? Because according to the Mekubalim, there are 7 levels between heaven and earth. So as we're walking from the hearse to the grave, we're saying that the neshama of the deceased is step by step going up through those 7 levels till finally reaching Shamayim. Which means, according to this minhag, I'm not paskening a halacha here or talking about physics. What we're saying is that we believe that the neshama is sort of still connected to the body until the body actually reaches the kever. It's only at the moment that the aron reaches the kever that we say that the neshama has truly departed from the goof. Based on that, it's probably a good idea that hespedim should take place before that. Because you'd like the hespedim to be said at a point in time when the neshama is still, at least according to the mystics, still present. So it's a beautiful idea. Like I said, I'm not saying that it necessarily represents reality. There are other poskim that say that the neshama leaves the body immediately upon death. But according to this mystical interpretation, the neshama is with the body until the body actually reaches the grave side. And this is the pasuk that describes it. And let's go back to our context. King David is saying to his son, you have nothing to worry about because there are guardian angels assigned to you by Hashem. Now, you don't have to say it's angels in some physical sense. In other words, Hashem is arranging things to protect you. God's agents don't have to be angels. God's agents can be weather. Or God's agents can be, another army. And also, God can utilize everything as potential agents. So who are the agents in our pasuk is not so clear. But it doesn't make any difference. It means that Hashem is when you get to the level described by the Rabbi /father /King David, you are protected. And this is the pasuk that says it. How much are you protected? Totally. Look at verse 12. Al kapayim yisa'uncha. When you're walking, you're placing your foot into the palms of these guardians. You don't even touch the ground. Ki tigov be'evan raglecha, lest you should stumble or get hurt by some sharp piece of stone on the ground. In other words, nothing can get you. It's like even normal, you broke a glass last week in the kitchen. That piece of glass can't get you because when you step, there's a divine palm guarding your footstep. Now, you can take it more literally or more figuratively. It doesn't make any difference. The image is amazingly beautiful. The image I think of is Sir Walter Raleigh. The famous story about Sir Walter Raleigh took off his cloak and put it over this mud puddle for Queen Elizabeth I. That's like the image that's in my mind. Okay? That's what I get for studying history in college. But okay. But that's the image that I have. It's a very, very beautiful image. By the way, there are stories that the emperors of China had slaves hold up their footsteps as they walked, so they never touch the ground. So it's lahavdil, like a similar thing. Okay? Yes, please.
We have to go. I think it's Rabbi Tafman. I remember who helped his mother walk because she was so weak, and any dirt would have. She was such an istiness, such an istiness that anything would have perhaps even killed her, but definitely have hurt her. Yeah. It's just a beautiful, beautiful image. Okay. Well, I was giving rather innocuous things that might hurt you here in verse 12. Verse 13, they're saying the stuff that it protects you from is pretty noxious, is pretty dangerous out there. Okay? Al shachal v'feten tidroch. You can walk over a shachal and a feten. Now, there are a lot of arguments about what exactly these nasty things are. Shachal is probably some sort of baby, either lion or bear. My translation here is cub. It's some sort of, amongst mammals, we've got some large predators. A shachal is a baby from one of the large mammalian predators. Take your pick for which one it is, whether it's a lion cub or a bear cub or whatever. We had them all here in Eretz Yisrael.
So it's lion. Yeah.
You have lion cub, okay? The reason I don't like lion, there's nothing wrong with saying lion, and many Meforshim say lion, is because in the second half of the verse it uses lion. So I'd like it to be another, just for variety, But it means but shachal, everyone agrees that it is a mammalian, a mammal type predator that is dangerous. And we had them here in Israel. Lions, we didn't have tigers, but we did have bears. Okay, and panthers, the only one that's left, there are 1 or 2 panthers left in the Judean desert. The lions and the bears have been killed out over the years, sadly. And a peten is a venomous snake. Sometimes you see asp, sometimes you see viper. I have viper.
Viper. Yeah.
You have viper. We're not sure exactly which venomous snake it is, but there are venomous snakes here in Eretz Yisrael. Mostly in the Midbar. You go to the Negev, but also in Midbar Yehuda. In the Judean desert, they also, and King David knew of these dangers. He was out there, and and you had to save your sheep and yourself from getting bitten by these venomous snakes. Okay, and so these angels, guardian angels, are protecting you from all of these, really toxic dangers. Tirmos, and you can trample upon. Romes means like crawl over. Okay. You can trample over a kfir, that definitely is a small lion, and a tanin. Okay, big argument about what a tanin is. Okay, where do we have the term tanin? Where this argument begins? Back in the plagues in Egypt, when Moshe Rabbeinu puts his staff on the floor, it turns into a tanin. The second time, the first time in chapter Gimel, chapter 3 of Exodus, he puts the stick on the ground in front of Hashem. And when he puts the stick on the ground in front of Hashem, it turns into a nachash. But when he does it for Pharaoh, it turns into a tanin. And we don't know what a tanin is. But most of the modern researchers on these issues in Tanakh believe that a tanin is a crocodile. Not the way we remember from the movie with Charlton Heston, where it turned into a snake,
It says a serpent.
a cobra. Yeah. A lot of people say serpent. Right. The problem with it being, although many commentaries say it's a crocodile, the problem with that is Israel doesn't have crocodiles. For crocodiles, you have to go to Egypt. There were Nile crocodiles, but they're not. So that's a problem with that interpretation. Although I happen to have the Mossad Rav Kook, and there the picture they show is a crocodile. If you look at the picture, they show a nice big croc. Okay.
Could they have had crocodiles at that time?
Not in Israel. There were crocodiles in Egypt. There were crocodiles. Some people believe in the Golan. Now there's a crocodile found. In Hamat Gader. Some people say they were bringing them back because they thought once there were, but not where King David lived. In Yehuda and Shomron, in what we call, biblical Eretz Yisrael, there weren't crocodiles. That's a weakness with that particular pshat. But it doesn't make any difference. The whole idea in verse 13 is that you're going to be protected from these things that normally are very dangerous. You won't have to worry about them because they can't get near you. Please.
I was going to say, it could be figurative.
Yeah, it doesn't make any difference.
If you're around, you got to go fight battles.
Except the poet King David. Tanin being a crocodile could be true if it was Moshe Rabbeinu writing this. right? Because Moshe Rabbeinu did see crocodiles in the Nile, for sure. So if it's Moshe Rabbeinu, then crocodile makes more sense. If it's David HaMelech, he tended to write about the things that he really saw. His poetry is really based on his experience walking through the Judean hills and farming, and mostly shepherding, but a little bit farming. Okay? That's the end of the second blessing of the teacher or father. What's different? I gave you one difference a few minutes ago. One difference is that it's softer. Remember in the first part, when God protected you, you were in a bomb shelter? Here you're in a tent, or in a haven, or in your living room, right? So that's already softer. Do you notice in the first half of the poem, a lot of people are getting hurt? Thousands are falling on one side of me, tens of thousands on the other side of me. Who's getting hurt in the second part of the poem? Nobody. We believe in many, many midrashim and many, many mystics pick up on this idea that there are different levels of tzaddikim. One level of tzaddik protects himself and perhaps the people right around him or her. Another kind of tzaddik protects the entire generation. And the second half of the poem is the teacher or King David saying, but you know what? We can get to even a higher level so that not only will you not be hurt in war, there won't be any wars. If we can achieve a high enough level of spirituality, war won't even be within our experience. And that's really cool. And that's the second part of the poem. So the first part of the poem is like stage A, and the next part of the poem is stage B. A higher level has been achieved because you've learned the lesson so well. Because you have become so righteous that Baruch Hashem, even the people around you and the entire door is saved. That's a very, very beautiful idea that in the second blessing explained to the student or son. And then we come to the last three verses, for which I did not leave myself enough time. Okay, if we have to leave over a verse, we'll do it for next time, because the last verse is going to take a bit. The last part of the poem is the third speaker. And the third speaker is Hashem. That after you've had this conversation between the Rabbi and the Talmud, the master and the acolyte, however you want to explain it, okay? Now Hashem explains or announces to the world that all of what has been said is true. Ki bi chashak va'afaltehu asagvehu ki yadashmi. The two parts of this line are saying the same idea in two different ways. The reason that you can achieve this level of safety is because be chashak. Now, what's a cheshek? A desire, a lust, a want. It's a powerful word for something that you must have. I have a cheshek for that. It's something, it's an almost irresistible urge for something. My translation? Because he is devoted to me. Devoted is not bad, but the cheshek means, just like can't live without me. How does desires? Yearns. I like yearns better. Okay? It's a strong cheshek. You have to look at the last chapter of Hilchot Teshuvah in the Rambam to understand this line. In the last parak of Hilchot Teshuvah, the Rambam talks about loving God. And you love God so much that if there's any time that you don't feel God's presence, you're lovesick. The description sounds like, some, like a couple, and one of them is sitting next to the phone, waiting for the phone to ring, and just can't stand the fact that they're away and that they can't bear it. Okay, and that's cheshek. And that idea that the Rambam explained. Look, we don't think of the Rambam as a romantic, but when you read the 10th chapter of Pirkei Avot, he really comes across as extremely romantic, and it's very, very beautiful. And that's cheshek, because you have this great yearning for me. I like yearning the best. Afaltehu, such a person will be delivered, is the translation I have here, will be saved, will emerge unscathed. What is a palit in both biblical and modern Hebrew? A refugee. You will escape from the danger. But in the first one, there's danger. So I believe the first half of this line refers to the first half of the poem. The second half of the line, which says the same thing, Asagvehu ki dermi, I will place him in a good place. Okay, the language I have here is, I will keep him safe. Asagvehu. I don't know, safe isn't good enough. It's like a haven. It's like, we had haven before. It's like a good place. Sometimes, both spiritually and physically, you sometimes feel like, wow, I'm in such a good place, right? That's asagvehu. Nizgav. I feel, wow. That's the second part of the poem. The first part of the poem, first part of this line refers to the first part of the poem where you're saved from real dangers. That's a refugee. The second half of this line is like the second half of the poem. God is placing you in a situation of total security, warm fuzzies, okay? Hugs, embraces. There's no danger at all. You just feel totally secure. Does everyone see how that works? And I think it lines up nicely with the poem itself. That Hashem, Kaviyachol, is following the lead of the poet in that sense. Okay, here we go. Second line. This goes back to my favorite line in Ashrei. When we daven, what is it that we really want? It's not what we're asking for. What we really want is this sense of closeness to God. Karov Hashem l'chol karov. That's the same thing here. Yikra'eni, such a person calls me, ve'ehenehu, and I answer them. Imo anochi bitzara. When something negative is happening, when they are in a tzara, narrow space, difficult situation, under pressure, I'm there with them. Who was the first person, I think it's the first person, that Hashem said this to in Tanakh? Who was the first person Hashem said this to? Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu is afraid to go down to Egypt. They all going down to Egypt, and he's afraid. And he's saying, God says, I'm going down with you, and I'm going to come back up with you. Of course, with you didn't mean you, it meant the children, with you in terms of your children, but that's the first, and this is that idea. Even when there is some trouble, you're not going to really feel in a bad situation, because I'm with you in your tzara. Now we could look at this the way the Piasetzna talked about the Holocaust. And this is a difficult position. I think it fits in to this idea. The last Torah in Eish Kodesh. Eish Kodesh is the famous commentary on Chumash by the Piasetzna, who became the Rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto, and was eventually, of course, killed. And he gave drashot on Shabbat and on Chagim. And his drashot, at least some of them, he wrote down and he put into a metal box and was found after the war. He's famous for educational books he wrote in the 30s, but during the war he was the Rabbi, and he kept the people going. The last Torah that he wrote talked about Hashem being with us b'tzara, and he describes it as, it's a difficult interpretation. He describes it as a parent bringing a child in for an operation. The child, Klal Yisrael, needs this painful situation to save it from something. He doesn't say what the something is, but he's saying the Jewish nation's going through this because for reasons we don't understand, they need it, and Hashem, Kaviyachol, can't look. Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu in heaven, can't look because it's painful, even to Hashem. Like a parent can't watch the operation. You got to, the doctor might offer you a place where you can see what's going on. You just can't take it. You have to be in the waiting room, And Kaviyachol, that's the way the Piasetzin describes the Kadosh Baruch Hu during the Holocaust. Imo anochi b'tzara, I'm with you in your danger. I'm somehow there. Achaltsehu, I am going to get you out of it. Chalitza is the term for escaping from something, getting out of something. When you have a yibum situation, you have a surviving, brother-in-law from a wife who lost husband without any children. Okay, but if he doesn't want to marry her, he does chalitza. And today, amongst Ashkenazim, we only do chalitza. Okay, so chalitza means I got out of it. Okay, there's something, and you got out of it. By the way, the Israeli Army's unit for saving people, like in collapsed buildings, this unit of heroes that does it in war, but goes all over the world. They just were in Mexico saving lives. Okay, and that's called chalitza. That's what they call. Koach HaCholtzim. They're getting people. So I am going to get you out of this situation. Ve'achabdehu. And you're going to come out of it with honor and glory and respect. Sometimes someone that survives a bad situation, doesn't necessarily get any respect. They say, they feel, oh, it's good enough, I got out of it. What Trump said about Senator McCain, he got out of his difficult situation being a prisoner, but he didn't get much respect for it. Okay, at least from the president. But your situation is going to be when you emerge unscathed, you will be in an honored position. You're going to go from a sense of big trouble to a sense of, wow, I have honor, I have respectability. It's almost like what we went through in the late 40s. We went from, literally the edge of doom to, our own state, and we could stand up with heads held high. Okay, and that's what the end of this pasuk is describing, that kind of situation. Okay. Now we're going to start the last verse. We're not going to finish the last verse because I have to leave on time today because I explained to people that were here early that I'm actually teaching another class right now at MMY, so I have to run to go back to, I gave them their assignment and I have to go back to actually teach it in a minute. I'm substituting for someone this morning. But it's a beautiful pasuk. The minhag is to say it twice. Now the minhag to say things twice is very common. We have this very, very often. When is the most common time that we have this minhag to repeat a verse?
Hallel.
Oh, Hallel, yes. In other words, especially responsively. Yes. Definitely true. But I'm talking about not when it's a responsive thing, although this could have been a responsive thing. So that's really not a bad shot. And but it wasn't the one I had in mind. What happens when we're reciting something, and the minhag is to say the last line twice when we have completed something. The last line of many, I'm sorry? Like sometimes it's done in a maftir, but it's really done like when we finish a Megillah. Eicha, we say the last line again. Well, it's next to last because we like that one better. Okay, yeah, okay. We do it at the Miguel Esther. Okay, we do it with again. Kohelet's the next to the last again because we like that one better. So the minhag when you finish something quite often, and Kol Haneshama Telalka Haluka is also repeated because that's the last psalm in the book of Psalms. We're finishing the book. So it's a minhag to repeat when you're finishing something. So there are many, many meforshim that say that poems 90 and 91 form a unit. And that one of the reasons for the repetition is because you're completing that unit. Which makes a lot of sense. Because the beginning of this line says, Orech Yamim, long life I'm going to grant you. And the topic in Psalm 90 is the shortness of human life. So it's like we're countering the depressing part of Psalm 90 by repeating the last line in Psalm 91. So we're saying this line not only finishes Psalm 90, it also counteracts the depressing nature of Psalm 90. Especially on Shabbat, when we read the two together, it like finishes that unit. Okay? So that's one interpretation. That we're going to come to another in just a minute. Orech Yomim, length of days, long life, live to a ripe old age. How does?
With length of days.
Length of days, which is the most literal. What do you have for that?
I will give him a long and satisfying life.
Long and satisfying life. Aspieo, he's getting both in. Aspieo, the next one is, and they'll not only be long, but they'll be longevity. But they'll also be satisfying. There are people that live a long life and, spend their last few years, regretting still being around, regretting surviving. We know from the Holocaust, a lot of people had survivor's guilt. It's a very difficult psychological situation. But here we're saying, Orech Yamim Asbiyehu. It's not just that I'm going to grant it, it's going to be with Svi'ah. It's going to be with a sense of Soveya, V'achalta, V'savata, U'verachta, a sense of fulfillment. A sense of fulfillment. My mom, Allah Shem, lived to 96 and was so with it. All the way till the end. And I got this feeling, about her that, that it wasn't just 96 years. It was also with Svia. Even though at one point on her 95th birthday, she talked about maybe making it to 100. But it was a sense of Svia, that, it was, to be able to not just be 96, but, to talk to your grandchildren and, and still feel with it. That's wow. And that's the idea. Orech Yomim Aspiyehu. I'm not just supplying it. I'm going to make it fulfilling and satisfying. Very, very beautiful and powerful. Va'arehu bishuoti. And the person is going to be able to see and appreciate Yeshuati, my final salvation. Well, what is God's salvation? And you can look at this, and what I'm going to say now is that why I think it's really repeated, because there's two kinds of salvation. There's one salvation that has to do with personally, that you lived in your life through difficulties, and tough times, and you feel, that's behind me, and things are now going well. Okay, I'm now appreciating life. That's a personal salvation, and many of us have felt that in our lives. And of course, there's also the national salvation. And national salvation is, in the long term, of course, it's Mashiach, is Geula Shlema, B'mehera v'yameinu, right? That's one sense, but it's also a sense of, I gotta say, this is something that I was born in 1950, but I'm sure Jews felt this in 1950. Yeshua, we won the war, and now we have some breathing room. I definitely felt it in 1967 after the Six-Day Wars. If you remember, many of us are old enough to remember how terrible May was that year, when Nasser, Yamach Shemo, said, I'm going to kill all the Jews in Israel. And many of us were expecting a second Holocaust, God forbid. And then, wow, Yeshua T, there's God's salvation. I mean, it was, miracles of biblical proportions. Yeshua T. So there's both the personal level, which this poem is very personal, right? It's very personal conversation between two people that are very close to each other. But it's also, I think, is a reference to seeing the final salvation, or seeing a salvation of the Jewish nation. The Jewish nation somehow survives in a tremendously respectable way from very, very narrow streets, from Sarot Gedolot. This is very, very powerful. And I think that we repeat it not just for emphasis, and not just because it's ending this little section of the book of Psalms, especially for those who believe that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote this, but it also means that there are two kinds of Yeshua being described in the pasuk, and I think both of them are very, very powerful and very, very important, because we both live our own personal lives, but we also live our national life as well. And although there's a tiny bit more I want to say about this pasuk, I'm going to leave it for next week, because I sadly do have to run away to get back there. And please forgive, it's not nice of me what I'm doing right now, but an unusual circumstance. Those that want to look ahead, chapter 24 next week. Chapter 24 next week. A very, very beautiful, and a poem that doesn't have much downside to it. We're going to try to keep it going back and forth between poems that, like this one, that talk about difficulties, and then poems that talk about just the wonders of life.
Chapter 24.